Hello everybody, this is Curtis Campogni and welcome to a bonus episode of Empathy Here, Not There, the podcast dedicated to exploring the profound impact of empathy in various aspects of our lives. I'm your host, Curtis Campogni, founder of Speak for MC, Speak for Motivating Change. Over the next 4 weeks, we're going to have some exciting episodes lined up. We'll explore empathy in politics, social media, mediation, and sports. We're also securing some amazing guests for interviews, and we are really excited about the direction of this podcast. After the first episode, though, I've received many comments, messages, and emails discussing different perspectives on what empathy truly is. This feedback inspired me to record the bonus episode that you're listening to now, so we can break down the differences between compassion, sympathy, emotional empathy, and cognitive empathy. In talking to individuals when I do workshops or reading some of the comments, we tend to blur these four together. So I wanted to create a bonus episode for you where we can take a deep dive and unpack them. I believe empathy, as you know, is so powerful because it challenges us to recognize nuance. And perhaps one of the more nuanced topics is empathy itself. So let's do it. Let's talk about it. Here is a bonus episode of Empathy Here, Not There. Let's start with compassion. So compassion is a deep awareness of the suffering of another individual with a desire to alleviate that suffering. It is not just about understanding someone's pain, but also feeling motivated to take action to help relieve it. Compassion tends to be very action-oriented. For example, if you see someone struggling with a heavy load, you might feel moved to offer help. That is compassion in action. A real life example of that is like if you're seeing a coworker who is overwhelmed with a tight deadline or maybe has multiple things they need to do. You decide to stay late to help them finish that work. This act of compassion not only alleviates their stress, but also strengthens your workplace relationship. So compassion very much focuses on the awareness you have of the pain or adversity or struggle someone else is going through, and you're willing to take some sort of action to help them in that situation. So let's talk about sympathy, which is one that gets confused with empathy quite a bit. Sympathy is feeling pity or sorrow for someone else's misfortune. It's about feeling for others, but not necessarily understanding their situation deeply. There's often an emotional distance in sympathy, as it doesn't require personal sharing of the other person's feelings. A common example is like if you heard about a friend's loss, they lost a pet, maybe they lost a family member, maybe they lost a job. Sympathy would be feeling sad for them. You acknowledge their suffering, but you don't really take any real action beyond just feeling sorry for them. Let's say a friend tells you they lost their pet. You feel sorry for them and you express your condolences, but you don't deeply share their grief. This is sympathy. You recognize their pain, but maintain an emotional distance. Sympathy doesn't really require any action. It's just, wow, that sucks. I feel bad for him. So let's jump from sympathy to actually talking a little bit more about empathy. And we'll start with emotional empathy. As you know, I like to kind of separate the emotional empathy versus cognitive empathy. So emotional empathy is known as affective empathy. It's the ability to share and truly feel another person's emotions. If it involves experiencing the same emotions as the other person, as an example, seeing a loved one cry, and then you hear their situation and you begin to feel their sadness as if it were your own. That's emotional empathy. You're trying to put yourself in their shoes from an emotional perspective. You feel it, you connect with it, and you're doing your best to share that with them. An example of that would be, let's say your friend is going through a really tough breakup. As they confide in you, you start to feel their heartbreak deeply, almost like you're experiencing it yourself. You might even cry with them, and you might even share the emotional burden of what they're going through. Emotional empathy is really powerful because you are diving into their experiences from an emotional perspective. This is really different than cognitive empathy. Cognitive empathy, even though it's also perspective taking, it's more about the ability to understand another person's emotions without having to share them, without having to dive in there from an emotional side. It's more an intellectual understanding of another person's mental states, their emotions, their motivations, their thoughts, their attitudes that led to a particular decision, behavior, or an experience. Let's say you're listening to a coworker describe their stress about a project deadline and understanding why they feel that way. Even though you don't feel stressed yourself, demonstrating cognitive empathy is trying to see where their stress is coming from their perspective, trying to put yourself in their lens. Another example is, let's say for our parents, your child is upset because they didn't make the football team or the basketball team. While you might not share their disappointment emotionally to the same extent, you understand their feelings and you offer words of encouragement and support to try to help them see different perspectives on the situation. So you put yourself in their shoes about what it might feel like, or how that experience might be impacting them and their decisions. But then you also try to introduce some different ideas and nuance to the situation based on how they're seeing it. Cognitive empathy is really leaning into what does the world look like from that person's perspective, more again from an intellectual, logical standpoint. You really want to just try to get it, understand their motivations. It's a really powerful approach as long as you're not using cognitive empathy in some form of manipulation. Because the truth is, our personal morals and our values greatly influence how we express compassion, sympathy, and empathy, and cognitive empathy versus emotional empathy. Because they kind of act as internal guides, your values, your morals, that shape the extent to which we are motivated to help others, the extent to which we're willing to feel sorrow, share emotions, or understand others' perspectives. It's a lot of effort sometimes to suspend your own ego and your own beliefs and the way you see the world to prioritize someone else's. And then if there's a moral component or your values are making it hard for you to do so, we might just not do it. It might seem impossible. An example of that is, let's say someone who values like giving back and putting others above self, they might be more inclined to demonstrate compassion or a compassionate action, while someone who values emotional boundaries, self-care perhaps, might lean towards cognitive empathy. You know, someone who emotionally doesn't have a lot to give to others right now, they might not demonstrate compassion in that situation, or a compassionate action, or even an emotional empathetic approach, but rather lean towards cognitive empathy, so they could still try to understand someone's perspective without actually having to feel what they're going through. An example of that is, let's say you live somewhere that was affected by a natural disaster. Someone with strong values of community service might volunteer to help rebuild homes in that community, driven by that compassionate action. Meanwhile, another person might just donate money instead, influenced by their value of maintaining those emotional boundaries. So that person donating money, they're still taking an action, but they're taking an action that doesn't require them to necessarily dive in deeply emotionally. There's more of a disconnect in hitting a button and donating versus being side by side with the people suffering and building those homes. There's not a right or wrong in this situation. It's just, again, understanding your own situation and saying which of these approaches makes sense for me. Which of these approaches can I take? The other dilemma sometimes when I talk with people about empathy is when they talk about, does empathy mean you're condoning the actions of others, or you're justifying behaviors that you disagree with? If I practice empathy, does that mean I'm saying it's okay that this person acted this way or thought this way? The short answer is no, but let's talk about it here. So how we justify or how we condone our own actions, it does impact when we're willing to be empathetic, for sure. For instance, if someone justifies harsh discipline, let's say they are a parent and they believe in harsh discipline, those type of actions, that type of parenting style, it's necessary for teaching kids and making sure they stay in line. They might then find it harder to emotionally empathize towards the suffering of those actions. right? So they might emotionally resonate with a different topic, let's say of someone who's homeless, but then when it comes to children who are not responding well to harsh discipline, they might not be willing to emotionally connect with that child because they themselves are someone who believes harsh discipline is effective. So in that situation, I'm willing to practice emotional empathy over here, but if I practice it on this side, does that mean there'll be some cognitive dissonance between what I feel and then what I'm doing? Another example is we've all been in a situation, a manager who believes that maybe like strict deadlines or high pressure are necessary to ensure outcomes and productivity. They might then overlook the stress and the burnout that their team experiences because of that high pressure and justify their actions as essential for the company's success, thereby suppressing any real need to demonstrate empathy in that situation. So they are unwilling to step into the shoes, either from an emotional perspective or an intellectual one, because they believe that high pressure situations made them who they are. So that must mean that is the way to approach others to make them or help them rise as well. So as you can see, there's definitely some differences and barriers to practicing empathy with others. My challenge for everyone listening, and when I talk with others about empathy and compassion and sympathy, is that you just try your best to make choices that align with the type of approach that you say you're taking. In other words, if you are saying, hey, I want to show you that I really care about your emotional experience, but then I'm not making choices that align with showing you that, that's where we get really problematic. So I'm challenging you to say, in this situation, can I give emotional empathy? If I can't, then make choices that align with some of the other approaches that you can. Just don't be fake about it. Don't say you're doing one thing, but then your actions actually reflect something else. So really challenge yourself in this situation. Can I be compassionate and take action towards it? Am I just tapped out and I can just, resonate with you with some sympathy and I can say, wow, that's really tough. I have you in my thoughts. Is that all I can give? Can I, on an emotional level, sit side by side with you and try to experience this with you and cry with you to share what you're feeling? From a cognitive standpoint, if I adamantly disagree with a perspective or a behavior someone had, can I step into their shoes despite that and suspend my ego? These are all questions we have to ask, and I think they're important questions because when we ask them, the way we respond to people influences how they respond back to us. And if we're creating an environment that is collaborative, that is intentional, and that we are behaving in a way that represents the actions we ultimately want, I think that can go a long way with influencing positive change. So ask yourself, is this compassion? Is it sympathy? Is it emotional empathy? Is it cognitive empathy? Try to look at the nuance of all these situations and make decisions that you're proud of. So I hope this deep dive into empathy has been helpful. If you have any thoughts or questions, feel free to reach out. Don't forget to subscribe. Stay tuned for the upcoming episodes of Empathy Here, Not There, where we got some discussions on politics, social media, mediation, sports, and a lot more. I really want to thank you for taking time to listen, and I want to thank you in advance for participating in this discussion. Your comments, your feedback, your emails, your messages go a long way in having a conversation that's so incredibly important. So, until then, remember, empathy starts here, not there, and it can change the world. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I will see y'all soon. Bye, everybody.